Think back to deep in your past. Who was your first friend? How did you become friends? Are you still friends with that person? And if you're not, why not? Do you remember? I ask because I find this topic of friendship both fascinating and deeply puzzling. You see, when I grew up, I had almost no friends. That's me in the middle, puzzled as can be. I think that is my baby picture from 1970. I think I looked that way through almost my entire grade school years. I was kinda like the little boy on the left that you see, looking at groups of kids doing things together that were not playing sports. You see, I understood getting together to play sports. I did not understand friendship. I was naturally shy and introverted, and I still am. How many, fellow introverts out there? Oh, right, whoa. I'm in good company, and I see you. How many of you can walk into a room of 100 new people and walk out with at least 50 new friends? Okay, you are a mystery to me, a wonderful mystery, but a mystery because I'm not at all like that. In addition to being naturally shy and introverted, most kids didn't want anything to do with me. They thought I was very weird. So I was one of those kids who liked school. I would run to the library at the first opportunity and check out stacks of books. You see, it's a habit I still have. I love to read. I love to learn. I love to take things apart and put them back together. And because of this, I got picked on and for other reasons we don't have to go into. But they didn't want to come near me. And honestly, I wasn't that interested in what they were doing. They like to gossip, talk about clothes, be mean to kids, slack off in school. What's up with that? So for the most part, I was fine with being the girl on the left. That's actually not a photo of me, although it could have been. I often could be found up in a tree, up away from people who I didn't really like, reading my books, my beloved books. Now, for the most part, my friends were fictional characters. People like Pippi Longstocking, Sherlock Holmes, Jane Eyre, and finally, when I got around to meeting him in the pages of a Rand novel, my favorite, Howard Rourke. At the time, I was fine with all that. But as I got older, I went from being alone up in a tree to being intensely lonely. See, I had all these ideas swirling in my mind and no one to talk with about them. I really longed to meet real life people who were like the friends I'd made in my books. That was then, and this is now. I have friends everywhere. Ah, you got the reference. If you've seen Andor, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, that's okay. You have time. There's a few more days left of the conference. If you see yourself in these photos, please raise your hand. Some of my friends are at this conference. Hi. Okay. If you don't see yourself, that doesn't mean you're not a friend of mine. It just means I had a wealth of photos to pick from and I couldn't fit them all on here. Maybe some of you will be in pictures next year. Well, you saw me then, back in the day, sitting up in a tree. This is me now. How did I get here? It was a combination of trial and error, and also uh, to take you on a roadmap of what we're going to do today. It'll mostly be the part that's not trial and error, but from asking and answering lots of questions with the help of great thinkers like Aristotle and Ayn Rand, who've accompanied me along on this journey of discovering what friendship's all about. The first part of the presentation is going to use Aristotle as our guide on understanding the nature of friendship. And then the second part, we're going to take a look at and together and discover what does that look like in action through a form of art. And there should be about 15 or 20 minutes for questions before we come back to some takeaways I'd like to share with you at the end. So first up, the nature of friendship. The first person who really took friendship seriously was Aristotle. He spends 20% of this book on this topic. That's how much it mattered to him and how important of a role he thinks it plays in people's lives. His method is to find puzzles about things in the world and ask questions about them as the start of inquiry. So the questions he helps us to ask and answer are: what are friends? What kinds of friendships are there? Is friendship good, and if so, why? And are there ever any reasons to end a friendship? First up, what goes into being and having a friend? What are the ingredients of friendship to help us see its nature? First, you need to have some kind of emotional, warm regard for another person. You perceive that there may be some value in another individual, and you're drawn toward them, a sort of friendly feeling. But that's not enough. You have to have somebody else who also has that friendly feeling toward you, and you both have to be aware of this, or there's no relationship. If you're both sitting in corners feeling friendly feelings toward another person or to one another, and you don't know about it, you haven't yet begun a friendship. Next, they have to be between people who are roughly equals. What does that mean? We're going to see throughout the presentation how this unfolds. There are many layers of this. Aristotle distinguishes this sort of relationship of friendships from other kinds that may be on an unequal footing, like parents and children, a boss and an employee, mentor-mentee. These are all important relationships. They are not friendships. You need to be on a roughly equal footing for them to work. And the last component, all of them aim at gaining some sort of value. The kind of value you can gain through friendship is what helps distinguish kinds of friendship from one another. First up, Aristotle says there can be utility friends. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's where you, as you can see in the pictures here, maybe you bring groceries to a neighbor and she waters your plants while you're on vacation. Or a friend borrows a power tool from you and next week he needs a ladder, right? And these are what's called external goods. And so the basis of them is that you can count on each other to swap these external goods. But these kinds of things are coincidental to who you are as a person. This isn't a bad thing. This is a type of friendship. But because they're based on external goods, they are fleeting and they can dissolve easily. If your neighbor who watered your plants moves and you need to find somebody else, that friendship might end. No big deal. It wasn't that deep anyway. Another kind of friendship is pleasure friends. And here we see pictured people going hiking together. Maybe you have a meetup group that you sign up through hiking with. I've done that before. Or maybe you have your friend who you like to have ice cream with and go for walks on the beach and you have a good laugh, and that's about it. That's a pleasure good where you enjoy spending a certain amount of time around a shared activity and have fun with that person. Nothing wrong with that one either. And yet, this is still fairly coincidental to who you are. I wouldn't say eating ice cream and walking on beaches is essential to my identity, even though I find it pleasant to do so. Because of this, just like utility friends, these are relatively fleeting and be easily dissolved. If, for example, I stop liking ice cream, goodness forbid, uh, then my friend will be like, yo, I'm not going to walk on a beach with you. So, okay, fine, not a big deal. There's other stuff I like to do. We're going to come to what Aristotle regards as the best kind of friendship of all, character friends. I selected these photos for a reason. Anybody notice what's special about what's on the top photo? They're reading books. Woohoo, my kind of folks. Okay. They take ideas seriously. They're having a conversation. They're not reading up a tree by themselves in separate trees. They're sitting in a library reading books and talking together. Okay. And I imagine, this is why I selected the second photo, that these two young men met at college perhaps, and this is them 60 years later still talking it up. I'm going to show you why Aristotle sees this as a trajectory of character friendship. First, as the name suggests, they're based on a person's good character. This is not coincidental to your being, like, uh, being a reliable plant waterer or eating ice cream on the beach. Uh, this is central to who you are. Your character, what you morally stand for, the character you have shaped. Because of this, these friendships take a long time to form, Aristotle explains. Not only do you need to spend a lot of time together to get to know one another's minds, what do you believe? What do you think? What do you like? What do you dislike? What do you not understand and want to talk about further? You also need to not only hear their words and know their minds, you need to see them act in the world. Because character is how you show up through your choices, the kind of person you become. That takes time to excuse me, that takes time to exhibit to another individual diachronically, that is through time, so that someone can get to know you, form a sound judgment about you, and trust you. So they take a long time to form. Sounds like a lot of work, right? And it is. This is why they're relatively rare, and you'll have relatively few character friends. You may have lots of utility friends, lots of different pleasure friends. Character friends take a while to form, not just because there might not be a lot of people who are really upstandingly good individuals, but because the depth of time commitment needed to see and know one another, to spend the time, and to share this kind of life together takes a while to form. But because of that, they're incredibly durable. Yes, you can reform your character over time, but that doesn't happen easily and it takes time to do. So who you've become and who you might yet to become will take time, and this is the solid grounds on which this sort of character friendship is based. They must be grounded in self-love, Aristotle argues. You cannot perceive and love the good in another person unless you understand, recognize, and love it in yourself first. When you do that, when you're a person who treasures who you've become and you're proud of that, then you're ready to go out and seek the character friends you yearn for, and you can recognize the qualities in others. Without that, you can't have character friendship. And because of this, the friend who you come to love, Aristotle describes beautifully as a second self, and you love beholding your friend existing in the world outside of you. They are the closest kind of individual to you outside of who you are. So what are the values you get from character friends? Psychological visibility. To be seen for who you really are. And if you've earned a character that warrants being seen that way, then you want to be known. You want to know. And that psychological visibility is really important, to be seen and not to feel invisible like you're a ghost in the world. Other benefits, they help bring out the best in us because we can only see so much with our limited uh, knowledge base. We can make mistakes. Sometimes we're prone to deceiving ourselves. But if our friends love us, Aristotle says they will help engage in mutual correction. They can perceive you from a vantage point that they may not be able to perceive themselves. You step up to the plate and you kind of nudge them in the right direction. He says you become noble from noble people. So being careful to surround yourself with such folks when you become such a folk. We really care about friendship. When all the years I taught, this is a topic most riveting for my students because they're at a time in their lives where they're discovering who they are and they want to share themselves with people. They want to find people to spend their time and lives with. We put a lot of time and effort into making friends and keeping them. But Aristotle knows that sometimes they've got to end. He brings up a few different contexts in which this might happen, and he gives us rational grounds for why we may need to do so. First, when you're no longer receiving a mutual benefit. If your funny friend ain't so funny anymore, maybe you have to part ways and you won't be signing up for his comedy club sketch next week. You're like, dude, you lost the magic. So, yeah, so it happens. Maybe you have mismatched expectations. This is where I'm gonna come back to that point about needing to be roughly equal. If you think you have a character friend and that person regards you as a utility friend, this is not going to end well, right? Because when you perceive that you are merely being used for stuff and you thought that that person was a person of character, this is going to lead to heartbreak and a rupture of friendships. This could happen for one of two reasons. One, it could be the case that that person deceived you. They thought, "Oh, I'll pretend to be their best friend and I can then get tickets to, this next rock concert or something." Fill in the blank with who your favorite performer is, and you can get tickets. Maybe they befriended you under false pretense. They're culpable for that. But maybe you deceived yourself and thought because you were lonely, maybe you moved to a new place and you wanted some friends and you latched onto this person. And maybe you're the one who's culpable for not seeing the warning signs because out of desperation, you wanted human connection. So that friendship's probably going to have to end. Sometimes childhood friends outgrow one another. You may have been on roughly equal starting points in your younger years, and then at a certain point, somebody's like, "Woohoo, I'm living in the old glory days of high school." And meanwhile, you're like, "Oh, okay, I could see why, because you had a great time, you were popular, we were doing these fun things. But you know what? I'm a lifelong learner. I am an entrepreneur. I want to be a CEO of a company." And your paths start diverging, and there may not be shared ground anymore to spend time with. The most difficult kind of case Aristotle discusses is when a character friend goes bad. If you perceive somebody who's going off the straight and narrow, Aristotle doesn't think you should ditch him right away and be like, "Whoa, dude, what are you doing? Don't, I don't want anything to do with you." He says you should fight harder to rescue your friend's character than even if you were to try to save his property, like say his house was burning down. Yeah, help put out the fire. But his character's even more important. He can always rebuild a house. Rebuilding a character is a lot of work. So you should work hard for that. But if your friend keeps refusing your efforts and won't take your feedback and keeps getting worse and worse, you're going to have to part ways. That's a rational reason for ending a friendship, even one that had been a character friendship. All right. Now we've seen from Aristotle what we could regard as like a theory of friendship. He's shown us glimmers of truths about friendship's nature, the value it can hold for you, the types of friendship, the circumstances under which one might end. However, sometimes you have to turn to art to say, okay, theory's great, but what does friendship look like? We see here in these two paintings, right? This is a form of art. And these are wonderful. The top one's called Kindred Spirits, and the bottom one is a childhood idol. We see beautiful depictions of friendship, but these are relative snapshots. To really see enacted or embodied uh, friendship of a wide variety, you need to engage in reading great literature. Oh, actually, well, in addition to the novels I have up here, a little plug for Jane Eyre, my second favorite novel after The Fountainhead. And speaking of literature and its importance, looking forward to Angel's talk tomorrow on that topic. So what I'm going to discuss here is very much focused on friendship. Angel's going to discuss more widely the power of great art. So to really see the embodied principles of friendship in action, we need great characterization, nuanced dialogue and conversation, watch people making choices, and see how that plays out. So it's going to be through great literature, I argue, that we can then go from the truth about friendship to seeing it truthfully rendered. I think Rand, who thought Aristotle was the greatest philosopher before her, uh, she took his ideas seriously. And I think that her views about friendship even though she never explicitly discusses Aristotle on the topic, she actually shows through her literature especially well, uh, the dramatization of the beginnings of friendship. She concretizes what egoistic friendship can look like and maybe should look like. She also does not shy away from showing conflicts between friends. And she also effectively depicts the ending of a friendship. So, let's take a look at beginnings. All friendships are based on some sort of shared value. The first example I'm going to discuss is from The Fountainhead between Howard Rourke and Mike Donegan. Relatively early in the before I talk about The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged, how many people in here have not read either novel? The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, how many people in here have not read either novel? One person. Wow! Okay. Well, two things. One, you are in for a big treat. These are awesome novels. My favorite's The Fountainhead. Uh, Two, there are going to be some spoilers, but I will keep the spoilers to a minimum, enough just to make the points I need to make here about friendship. So I'm giving a little bit of stuff away. I apologize for that, but it's unavoidable in this context. And I'm still shocked there's only one person who's not read. That's pretty remarkable. So back to Howard Rourke and Mike Donegan. We see early on Howard Rourke is working for architect Guy Francon, and he's sent out to a building site where construction is going on. An electrician, Mike Donegan, is there. He's facing a problem on the job, and he's having trouble resolving it. So Rourke walks up to him, and he's like, "Oh, do this thing. Like, just go right through the pipe." And he goes, "What do you know? You're just some pretty boy architect the firm has sent over." And Rourke's like, "No, do it this way." Rourke picks up a blowtorch and he proceeds to solve the problem. Mike is floored. First of all, he's not seen any architect from a firm come on a site and actually know how to do anything, apart from like making believe he actually can do anything. So he's right away gripped by Howard Rourke actually competently engaging in work. Mike cared very little for people. He worshipped expertness of any kind. And right away, he asks, "Hey, Red, you want to go get a beer?" So they go get a beer, and over that meal they have together, they discover they share the same hero, a man who both of them had worked for in the past, Henry Cameron. Their shared value that they're two shared values that they start their friendship on: competence in productive work, actually knowing how to make things and do things, and that they have the same hero who they looked up to as embodying that ideal. The next example is also from The Fountainhead, Howard Rourke and Austin Heller. A little bit later in the novel, Howard Rourke is working for a different architect, John Eric Snite. In Snite's architectural firm, everybody kind of contributes to the hodgepodge of creating one drawing for a potential client. The client in this case is Austin Heller. Austin Heller is an independent newspaper columnist who has devoted his life to combating coercion in every form. He wants a home built, a home he can love, and that means something. Those were the instructions given to the firm. But Snite's got his process, they all contribute to the hodgepodge. Austin Heller walks in to take a look at the drawing, and he looks at it, he goes, "It's so close. Not It's better than any I've seen from other architects who were just failed, because it's so close. If only it had some kind of unity, if it were integrated." Whew, that's all Rourke needed to hear. Rourke flies up to the drawing, he takes out a pen, he starts slashing stuff, and he redesigns it the way he would have done it all by himself. And the description is, Rourke's doing this, he looks up at one point, locks eyes with Austin Heller, and it was like a handshake. Rourke's told by Snite, "You're fired." Austin Heller goes, "We're both fired. I'm taking you out to lunch. And what's your name, by the way?" And he says, "Can you really design my home the way you just drew it?" Yes. He gave Howard Rourke his first commission and enough money to open up his own architectural office. He's now Howard Rourke Architect. Within 1 week after that, Austin Heller knew he had the best friend he would ever have in his life. Shared values, independent judgment, and integrity. We heard a lot about the power and importance of independence from Thomas prior to this. We see it showing up here. This is a shared value between these two men. They're not just architect and client, they're developing a friendship. A glimmer into one example from Atlas Shrugged. John Galt, Francisco d'Ancona, and Ragnar Damsjold. Searched long and hard to find a photo of three young men who I thought roughly resembled these three on a college campus reading books together. It took like 3,000 photos to sift through on Unsplash to find this, but I did. When these three young men, they were 16 years old, showed up on the campus of Patrick Henry University, they were drawn to each other almost at first sight, is the description that Professor Hugh Axton says to this. He imagines that's how it happened. These three young men find each other on this college campus. All three of them are double majors in physics and philosophy. All three of them have part-time jobs while they're in college to earn their own money and also to kind of get apprenticed, each of them into the professions they're interested in going into in their own fields. They have the shared values of reason, independence, integrity, and they are competent, self-made men who value productive work. These are the grounds of their friendship. So Rand beautifully shows the beginnings of these sorts of friendships in both these novels. Now for egoistic friendship. First, egoism. Egoism is the moral theory that Rand developed, where she argues that it's about you pursuing your rational self-interest throughout your whole lifespan, with your happiness as your highest good. A lot of people have problems with this, though. They think egoistic friendship sounds like an oxymoron. How many of you have heard these sorts of questions peppered at you if people find out that you're an egoist? I haven't even asked the questions. But okay, fair enough. When you say egoism, the hands and eyebrows go up right away. So yeah, I hear that, but I know the questions I've had to field are, wait a second, aren't you out for number one? Don't you just want to get whatever you want and you're willing to trample on people? And don't you just instrumentally value all other people anyway? Well, the answers to all those questions are a big fat no. And I'm going to summarize Rand's view, and she will show this through friendships, about why egoistic friendship is not an oxymoron. So what is it? What is it about? How do you answer these critics? You are the ultimate beneficiary of your actions. Your life is your own. And if the choices you're making, including who you select to have surrounding you as friends, does not ultimately serve your life, they're not going to be life-serving values for you, then don't pursue them. But that does not mean that you are the only beneficiary of your actions. You are the ultimate, not the only beneficiary of your actions. Do not forget that. Rand has a view that there are no conflicts of interest between rational people. If you're pursuing values and you're creating and generating value, that's not at the expense of other people. That's a zero-sum way of thinking. This is a win-win way of thinking. And in fact, egoism makes friendship possible. Why? This may actually sound a little counterintuitive to a lot of folks, maybe even to some of you. Egoism makes friendship possible because before you have any values to bring to the table, You have to create them first. You also have to have a self with interests and values and things about you, and you have to be the kind of person who can create value. If you're not bringing that to the table, you have nothing to trade with another person. It's through these shared values that you're drawn together. It's through these shared values that you stay together. Egoism is what makes friendship possible. Your self-interest is then partly promoted through the relationships that you have with your friends. Your life and your values are not something out there apart from you that you're going to get sometime in the future and then just rack up like trophies on the mantle. Every choice that you make in your life, every value you pursue and achieve is experienced by you and created by you now, now, now. And if your friends are values, they partly constitute what makes your life worth living. And this is going to set us up for these two next points. One, when you spend your resources on your friends, that is not selfless. If you're even willing to risk your life to save your friend, that is not selfless. That is integrity. Integrity is knowing what your values are and living them, standing for them, nurturing them. That is integrity. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this point in just a minute. But integrity isn't just spending money on folks. You also demonstrate your care and concern for your friends through the words you say. I love you. I can't wait to see you guys at the conference. And through your actions, remembering what they like and sending them maybe a mixtape of their favorite songs on their birthday. These are all ways of showing up for and expressing and demonstrating to your friends how much they mean to you. I want to go back to the point that is the stickiest on egoistic friendship, and that's the point that it's not selfless even to risk your life for them. Rand gives us a few wonderful examples. I'm going to talk about one she illustrates through action. In the top picture here, we see people in a steel mill, and this is from Atlas Shrugged. We see two instances where people risk their lives for their friends, and both of them are with Hank Rearden and Francisco d'Ancona. Francisco d'Ancona, in the first case, he shows up at Hank Rearden's steel mill, and they're engaging in an intense philosophical conversation. When they hear a siren go off, signaling a furnace breakout. A furnace breakout's a big deal. It could destroy the mills. Francisco, shockingly to Hank, leaps into action and runs to start engaging in the actions of competently fixing the furnace breakout, which is a skill almost no one has at that point. And at first, Hank's shocked because this is the kind of thing he would do. And here's this other man beat him to it, in fact. And he starts to feel these warm feelings of admiration for this man. And he runs to also be decide to contain the breakout. At one point, it looks like Francisco's wavering at the edge of the furnace and might plunge to his death. Hank Rearden risks his life. He jumps over to where Francisco is, grabs him, and saves him. And afterward, Francisco says to Hank, "You saved my life." Hank says, "You saved my mills." That is spiritual payment for a developing friendship. Francisco gets to return the favor a little later in the novel. We're going to fast forward here. And unbeknownst to Hank, Francisco is yet again on the grounds of the steel mills. This time, Hank shows up at the place that he owns, and he's viciously attacked by a thug who's part of a staged worker riot. He's unconscious. Francisco swoops in to save him, carries him to the medics to get taken care of. When Hank comes back to consciousness, he looks up, hears that he discovers Francisco is the person who saved his life. He looks over at him standing in the doorway. He was worriedly looking at his friend, and they smile at each other as though they had been friends since childhood. They resume the conversation that had been interrupted months before that they had started, and they continue on to have this very long discussion. That, in both cases, was integrity. I'm going to jump to the next point. Rand illustrates that not all friendships go very swimmingly. And honestly, how many of you have had a friendship where you've never had a fight, never had a disagreement? Okay, wow, all right. 5 of you out of 200. All right, wow. Uh, Give it time. It'll happen. But conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing. I used to be conflict averse when I was younger, and I thought, "Oh, let's keep a happy face on stuff and not cause rock the boat." Not a good move, and I had to learn the hard way that actually confronting challenges and facing conflict, drawing boundaries, learning to say no, knowing yourself well enough to do that, and respecting the other person enough to do that is really important in developing and cultivating friendships. So, let's take a look at the first case, back to Francisco and Hank. I'm gonna give a little bit of context before I comment on these points here. So we saw that Hank and Francisco were each uh, willing to risk their lives to save one another. But and throughout the novel, we see that they're both really top-notch thinkers and industrialists, hard workers, very competent at their crafts. But they are actually, for most of the novel, not equals. There are two important things that are at the source of their conflict. I'll identify them as concisely as I can. The first source of conflict is what I call a knowledge asymmetry. Francisco has a lot of information and knowledge about events and the larger context of what's going on in the world, and he has to keep most of it a secret from Hank. He's not at liberty to discuss and divulge a lot of this information, and Hank doesn't know that. So as a result, Hank thinks that Francisco has a morally worse character than he in fact has. And Hank actually resists a developing friendship with Francisco because of this knowledge asymmetry. Also, something Hank doesn't know is that Francisco is a morally really awesome person. And Hank actually himself has a mind-body conflict he has to work out, so he's morally not as integrated as Francisco. But Hank doesn't know these things. Francisco does. And despite Hank's resistance, Francisco's owning responsibility for being the source of the conflict. He's owning responsibility for cultivating the relationship. It's not going to be until the two of them, that sort of discrepancy in the knowledge and the moral characters starts leveling out that it can really fully blossom into a character friendship. So Francisco tries to manage those conflicts in these ways. He lets Hank be himself, but he also plants seeds to challenge him. He asks him lots of questions. And also, when Hank seems to run into these apparent contradictions, Francisco's like, you know what? Maybe you should check your premises. Wonder where you've heard that before. He knows what Hank's highest values are: productive achievement and his steel mills. Hank has worked all of his adult life to achieve this, and he's proud of this work. Francisco, unbeknownst to Hank, is actually operating on the principle of justice. He wants his friend to have his highest values, to be able to keep the rewards of all of his hard work. And he plants seeds of, do you really need to be supporting all these freeloaders around you? What are you getting in return? What are you getting? Leaves him lots of great questions to think about. And he respects Hank's volition. He gives Hank a lot of options, lets him choose, knowing full well Hank doesn't have the context he does, and Francisco's willing to bear a lot of stuff, including a slap across the face from Hank. I know, the slap. So Hank uses force against Francisco at one point because he's ignorant of a lot of things that Francisco can't let him in on at the time. But Francisco keeps his cool and he works for his friend's best interest. The next one is not about a character friendship, but it does raise a situation where, you know what? Sometimes people have broken relationships. Does that mean you have to totally burn those bridges? Rand shows us yet again, no. It's worth working through the conflict. You don't have to build bridges. There can be second chances. I'm going to say a little bit about the context of Howard Rourke and Peter Keating. Early in the novel, Howard, I would describe their relationship much of the novel as frenemies, right? They're not really friends, they're not really enemies. Uh, Howard and Peter meet each other at Stanton Institute at college because Howard boards at Peter Keating's mother's boarding house, so the two young men live in the same house together. They're both architecture students. And the thing is, Howard Rourke is really good at what he does. Peter Keating has no idea what he's doing. But how does Peter graduate valedictorian? He cheats. He lives with Howard Rourke. He's always asking Howard to do his work for him. He's like, I'm stuck on this drawing. You're really good at this stuff. Why does Howard do it? Howard cannot stand to see work done badly. He's got to fix it. It's the only reason why he goes along with it, and he goes along with it even when they both end up becoming architects in New York City, working at different architecture firms. It changes, though. There's an opportunity for this frenemy relationship to change, perhaps into maybe even a utility friendship, but how? Under what terms? The opportunity is Cortlandt Housing Project. What happens is Peter Keating comes to Rourke yet again, and this time is different, though. He says, Howard, I would really like you to help me with this. I know I've been a parasite all my life on people who are superior to me, and I've done this to you, but I'm asking you one more time. This is the first time Peter Keating is not pretentious. He's being honest with Howard Rourke, and Howard goes, ah. He doesn't leap at it right away. He says, I need to think on this, come back tomorrow. Peter comes back the next day. Howard says, you know what? I will only do this on one condition, that you show me you understand why I want to do this. What value would I get in doing this work? Through a bunch of conversation, Peter's like, because you love it. He's never shown that understanding before. Peter's honest. He understands it. They sign a contract. And they both admit their mistakes. Peter admits he's been incompetent and pretentious. Howard Rourke admits he never should have helped Peter cheat when they were college students. It wasn't serving either one of them well. So if you admit mistakes done in the past, if you draw clear boundaries, if you're willing to navigate through conflict, you can repair something and start anew. But sometimes even that hard work might lead to the ending of a friendship. This too, Rand dramatizes beautifully and sadly. Howard Rourke and Gail Wynand. They start an improbable friendship, improbable because Gail Wynand was a man who wanted power over other people so that no one could dominate him. Howard Rourke will operate only on the grounds of free and equal trade. How do they become friends? Gail Wynand wants a home built for him and his wife. Any building he's ever seen that he's liked was built by Howard Rourke, so he summons him to his office. Rourke goes in prepared to reject the offer because he inherited a hatred for Gail Wynand from his beloved mentor, Henry Cameron. Wynand, for his part, thought that Rourke was going to be like any other architect and would bend at the first sign of compulsion and trying to use threats to get whatever he wanted. Very quickly, both men experienced psychological visibility in ways that almost no one else had ever seen in either one of them. They're both extremely competent and have independent judgment. They're both excellent at their work. And they agree that Howard's going to build this home for Wynand. They end up let's fast forward a bit. They end up becoming very good friends. They even go on a vacation on a yacht, Winans yacht together. And at one point, Howard Rourke says, if this boat were sinking, if you were drowning, I would be willing to risk my life to save you. I couldn't and wouldn't live for you, but I'd be willing to die for you. He loves him that much. So what happens? It seems like they have the seeds of character friendship. Well, you see the inequality here. Their moral standing is not the same. Howard Rourke is fully integrated, loves his work, lives his work. Gail Winan seeks power over other people. Rourke fights really hard for Winan's character. He encourages him to hold out in a quest for integrity. He says, Gail, you are not born to be a second-hander. Winan is heartened by this, but he has to make a choice. And at a key moment, Gail Winan caves. He does not have the courage to live up to his own greatness. He is so mortified by his own self-betrayal at not becoming his best self that what he does is he terminates his friendship with Howard Rourke. He cannot look him in the eyes after he's done this. He won't communicate with him for a while, and then he summons him for one last interview where he kind of dons this, I call it like the veil of iceberg. Like he puts this kind of boundary between him and Howard. They're no longer Howard and Gail. It's Mr. Rourke and Mr. Winand. But what he does is officially wrap up the end of the friendship and tells him why this has to be this way. He does this out of love and respect for the man Howard Rourke is, the man of unimpeachable integrity, the very virtue that Winand renounced. I don't want to leave on a sad note. So what I'd like you to do is to think, yes, sometimes friendships have to end, but I want you to know, be willing to engage in the conflict. Be willing to embrace the challenges really good friends who love you will offer in the context of your life. So be willing to fight for that. Let's take a look at something I'd asked you to do in the next 1 to 2 minutes. I'm calling it the exercise of with a little help from your friends. If you don't have a pen and paper, just try to mentally put a few words into your mind here. But if you have pen and paper, I'm serious. This is a writing prompt. And this is where you can go from Aristotle's theory in philosophy to Rand's vivid illustration through fiction to applying it to your own life. Think about one challenging conversation a friend has had with you. I think we need to talk. How many of you have heard I think we need to talk? Okay. I have too. We can talk afterward about what I've heard. Ask yourself these 3 questions. What was the key point of the conversation? Why did they want to talk to you? How has that conversation that person had with you positively influenced your thoughts and growth? And think about what concrete ways your life has been enriched because of that person. It may be the case that you shut this person out of your life because you were defensive about what they raised. I don't know. Or maybe it brought you closer. But what I'd like you to do in asking and answering these questions for yourself is not just think about how to apply these ideas to your own life and to a relationship you've had with a friend. What I'd like you to do is when you work this out for yourself as a matter of justice, thank that person. Thank that person for having the courage of Neville Longbottom from Harry Potter, who is willing to stand up to his friends, which takes more courage sometimes than facing your enemies. Because if you're somebody like me who had very few friends, and it takes a lot of work to make and keep friends, the risk of losing them is a massive value to risk losing. But if you love them, they love you, they will challenge you to be your best self. We have about 10 minutes, I'm told, for questions, and then I'm going to turn to a very quick wrap up. So this is not the last slide, but I will leave this up here during Q&A. Please make your questions clear and brief. I will take one question at a time, or I will cut you off. Keep it moving.
I think Rand at some point mentioned, I could be wrong on this, but some objectives mentioned the idea that what you fall in love with is not character or values. You fall in love with a sense of life. And to me, I can see that it can fall in love with, you have differences in values, but somebody's sense of life you really like. Would that apply to friendship? In other words, would you modify Aristotle's point? It's character and or sense of life.
Okay, great question. So, Rand does talk about a sense of life is what you fall in love with, but a sense of, and this is a term of art in Rand's work. Actually, I don't have it here, but in Romantic Manifesto, Rand discusses the nature of sense of life and the role that sense of life plays in art. It's a kind of subconscious integration of all your value judgments about the world, about yourself, that kind of uh, uh, because they're formed from a young age, your evaluations of the world and your orientation toward the world. You have like an evaluation of states of affairs and people, you have emotions wrapped up in that. And sometimes you get a sense of not only from other people about what they value, but sense of life in art. It's a concretization. Like you can recognize like, oh, I love that painting because it represents my view of humans. It represents my values. And you may not be able to name it right away, but if you dig below the surface of sense of life, there you find moral evaluations, your views about the nature of the world and yourself. There's a lot of metaphysics and ethics packed into sense of life. So if you unpack it, you're going to be scratching the surface of, I think, signs of your character, what you value, what's important to you, and then how that shows up and who you are in the world. And if you kind of sort of perceive this in some ways in another person, it may be sense of life is the first proxy, but as you dig below that and get to know another person's character, you'll see that there are much deeper things at work there. So I don't think the two are really that separate. I think they're actually very interestingly woven together. Just sense of life kind of emerges first. And as you philosophically reflect, you'll get to the stuff on character a little bit later. But thank you for your question. Next.
Um, I imagine I'm not alone in this room with a bunch of younger people. A lot of us probably have met a lot of friends, utility friends, pleasure friends, online through virtual means. However, my question is more: could a character friend come from virtual means? And I guess there's another question in that, which is like
Uh,
the levels of
First question,
levels
one
of
question at a time.
well, the level of friendship of a character friend. Because I can imagine maybe like a very low tier if I like a low tier character friends, but then like taking that even further to like a Gail Wynad and a Howard Warwick as a virtual friend, like
Okay,
could you
so you have
imagine
you have a
that?
question about virtual friends and then finer gradations within those categories.
Yeah, yeah.
So okay, so I actually there are a couple of people who I befriended online. I'm actually a very in-person kind of person, and for those who know me more than less, you'll know that uh, who I am does show up through virtual means, but you really can't know somebody, like, you've heard keyboard warriors, what's going on behind the keyboard? Is what you're showing out there really who you are? So you need the embodiedness to really get to know someone fully, and you can kinda get a proxy through that, like, by Zoom, right? So the more asynchronous it is, the less reliable the judgment you form, but it can start there. I mean, so a couple of people who I absolutely love dearly, I got to know first, and I could hardly wait to meet them in person. I've actually gotten on a plane to go meet people who I only knew online. It's like, damn, you are bold for doing that. I was like, well, if you had as much trouble befriending people as I have in my life, you might get your ass on a plane too. So, to use a term of art there. So, but I'm absolutely serious. I've been told I'm very courageous for going to meet people I only knew online, and I didn't think of it that way. I just thought, well, there's a lot of promise here. and I'm willing to do this work, and if it doesn't pan out, so I'm out a few $100, plane ticket and whatever. But in each case, it ended up being very much worth it, and I'm glad I took the risk. So I think you can move from virtual. You have to be careful, you winnow out a lot of crackpots. I mean, 95% of the friend requests I get, believe me, do not get answered. I do a little digging, I'm like, "Ee, all right, nope. Nopeity nope, nope." Not even on Facebook, not friending you. So, you have to be careful in the weeding out, but I think that's a great point. Even in the buckets of utility, pleasure, and character friendship, there are gonna be tiers as you get to know one another. People will be closer and further away. So that's something more to think through, and I think that, especially at character friendship, because of the duration it takes to know people, that's gonna be at different stages. So I'll think about that some more, but I think that's a good direction to go in. Next question.
Yeah, it occurred to me in your talk here that some of your, not all of them, but some of these, particularly in the character friendship, overlap into the development of romantic relationships. And I was wondering if you have spent a lot of time thinking about that aspect and whether that might actually make a logical segue to this lecture.
Uh, okay, great question. Can things that started as character friendships develop into romantic ones? Yes. Aristotle actually builds on character friendship. He has only a few paragraphs talking uh, about love, a romantic love, uh, and it's not inconsistent with some of Rand's ideas about it. I know myself personally, Robert, my sweetheart, who I've been with for a little over 10 years, we started out as friends. I signed up for a meetup to go hiking, and that's where I met him. And we became friends over 6 months, and then one thing led to another, and here I am 10 years later. Extremely. So that's how it happened. Real life example. What are the takeaways from all of this? Yeah, you might be interested in the topic and you're navigating things with friends. Character matters. So carefully choose who to spend your time with. The company you keep makes a massive amount of difference in the quality of your life. Don't be afraid to navigate conflict. Do draw boundaries. And know that even being willing to risk your life for your most beloved is integrity. It is not selfless. While your happiness is truly an inside job, only you are ultimately responsible for achieving that, you do not have to go it alone. And my last thought for you is embody your values so that your kind of folks can find you. Thank you.